recognize the member for Fredericton South and leader of his party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise in response to the Minister's statement. Sometimes the timing works out just perfectly. So, Mr. Speaker, today the World Meteorological Organization released their views on if we stay on the current path we're following, that we will not in any way meet the Paris Summit's targets of 1.5, not even 2 degrees warming, but we're on the path to 3 to 5 degrees warming, Mr. Speaker, which is catastrophic. Catastrophic for people, it's catastrophic for communities, catastrophic for entire countries that are going to be drowned by rising sea levels for the small island nations of this world. Catastrophic for low-lying cities. So, Mr. Speaker, this issue is one of importance to us all. We've got to begin the energy transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy now. And that means using less fossil fuels. That means producing less fossil fuels and developing more renewable energy and using more renewable energy, Mr. Speaker. And the great thing is, in New Brunswick, we are blessed with a tremendous cornucopia of renewable resources that are diverse and plenty. And we also, in our province, have a tremendous workforce that is able to roll out those renewable resources, the technologies to harness those renewable resources, and employ a lot of people. And we've got entrepreneurs, Mr. Speaker, who have begun to do that. I think of Mark McAloon of Rothsay, who began with local investors, Mr. Speaker, began next-gen renewable energy and has built the first solar farm in New Brunswick on a dairy farm. Interesting enough, the cost of that, Mr. Speaker, for the dairy farmer, he's locked in his electricity costs at 7.5 cents kilowatt hour for the next 20 years. 7.5 cents a kilowatt hour for the next 20 years with electricity produced by the sun. So how about that? We've got Jacques and Roch Laforge in the St. Andre Grand Falls area, who've pioneered the use of the production of biogas from food waste and agricultural waste, Mr. Speaker. They're selling electricity to the grid and utilizing some of the waste heat. So that's a form of bioenergy. We've got lots of opportunity for that in New Brunswick, Mr. Speaker. It's been said in the past that New Brunswick is the Saudi Arabia of wind, and that is the case when you look globally at our wind resources. Tremendous opportunities here, both onshore and offshore, Mr. Speaker. Tremendous opportunities to put our trades to work, to create new opportunities for entrepreneurs, to utilize the brain power in our universities, Mr. Speaker, to help develop new technologies and new practices like the biodiesel development that occurred at the University of New Brunswick, which we can produce from waste streams from our pulp and paper mills, Mr. Speaker, creating a renewable fuel for trucks and heavy equipment, tractors, that is a green fuel. And it's renewable. Imagine that, right here in New Brunswick. We can do that. But the Premier and the Energy Minister would have us head in the completely opposite direction, to develop more fossil fuel production, put in place infrastructure that is going to last for years, meaning more and more fossil fuel production for years. And that's not to mention the impacts locally of fracking. One of the things the Premier likes to say, Mr. Speaker, about fracking is, well, since the moratorium was put in place in New Brunswick, there's been lots of experience, more experience with fracking in the United States, for example. Well, yes, and there's been more experience with the consequences of fracking. The scientific papers have been stacking up on the impacts in terms of the impacts on local air quality, negative impacts, the negative impacts on water quality, the negative, both groundwater that supplies people's wells and surface water, the negative impacts on health for people living near the fracked wells, the big problems of dealing with the toxic wastewater that is produced from the fracking wells. So that has been stacking up, the evidence has been stacking up since the moratorium was put in place here that is there for anyone to look at. So this doesn't make any sense for New Brunswick. We can lead the needed, necessary energy transition in this country because of the ample resources we've got from renewable energy, because of the trained people we've got in this province, because of the universities we have in this province, because of the entrepreneurial spirit we've got in this province, both in our urban and rural areas. And that's the great thing about this, Mr. Speaker. It's not that this development is not restricted to just one region of the province, but it would occur all across the province. And that's not even talking about the need as part of this energy transition to focus on reducing our use of energy overall through energy efficiency by building energy efficient buildings and renovating our housing stock so that it uses very little energy, renovating our building stock so it uses very little energy. So you know, with energy efficiency, you can't lose. You save money. You create jobs. You reduce your carbon footprint. So your pocketbook is better off for it, the economy is better off for it, and the environment's better off for it. Win, win, win. So let's get our tradespeople to work, renovating our buildings, renovating our housing stock, building new buildings and new houses, and helping lead the way in Canada on the energy transition to move away from fossil fuels towards renewable energy. There's the vision, Mr. Speaker. There's the vision. And
Member.